whatever it may be, that they're so overwhelmed by that to take their own lives. Okay. So, when we're translating this verse, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, a more appropriate translation is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not take a person into account for more than that which he can bear. Okay. So, and that's where it decides into sanity. That if a person is not sane, that he cannot think, he cannot rationalize, then that person cannot be held accountable for his actions. Because he does not even know what he's doing. He doesn't know a bottle from a box. So a person, number one, the first condition a person must fulfill for udhiyah to be necessary upon him is that he must be sane. The second is that he must be a Muslim. Right? And this is because naturally slaughtering and offering this, doing this as an offering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an ibadah. Right? And ibadah can only be performed by Muslims and not by kuffar. Right? Allah Ta'ala mentions this clearly in the Quran in many different instances. Right? Allah Ta'ala says, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ أَعْمَالُهُمْ كَرَمَادٍ اشْتَدَتْ بِهِ الرِّيحُ فِي يَوْمٍ عَاصِفٍ لَا يَقْدِرُونَ مِمَّا كَسَبُوا عَلَى شَيْءٍ ذَلِكَ هُوَ الضَّلَالُ الْبَعِيدُ. The example, the parable Allah Ta'ala draws for those who disbelieve in Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala are like those who have a mountain of ash. Right? They have a mountain of ash. Right? It looks so big, it looks, a person could be doing so many good deeds, charities, soup kitchens, etc. The list might go on. Right? It looks like he's doing a lot of good deeds. Right? But now a single wind, rihun asif, a single wind, strong wind comes and it blows the entire thing away. And then you realize it had no weight to begin with. Right? Because our deeds are only given weight when they are connected back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that should serve as a reminder for us that yes, we believe, that yes, we have Islam. But whenever we're doing any action, if true weight is only given to action when it's connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then I should always have this introspection. I should always be looking with scrutiny at all my actions. Are these truly for Allah ta'ala? That when I am praying, when I am fasting, when I'm doing sajda, is that truly for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That when I say Allahu Akbar and I start my salah, have I truly taken everything and thrown it behind my back? Do I really feel like I'm in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If not, then what is the weight of that salah? If I am in sajda, putting the most honorable part of my body on the floor, and I'm thinking of something else, then what is the value of that sajda? So, the next is that he must be an adult, or in another sense, he must be baligh. And this is more of an ikhtilafi issue where the fuqaha, the jurists, they disagree over whether a child, he has to give udhiyah if he has the nisab amount, which we will get into. That if a person, he's considered ghani in a technical term, that if he's considered quote unquote rich, even if he's a child, does he have to slaughter an animal on the day of Eid? So there is a bit of a discussion on this, but the preferred opinion is that a person, he has to be baligh. A person who is a child, whether he is a faqir, whether he is a poor person, whether he's rich, whether he has a lot of money or whether he has no money, he does not have to give udhiyah. Right? Only an adult is obligated to slaughter an animal. Now we're going to discussion of nisab. So this is a bit of a lengthy discussion, but as we are familiar that there is a threshold that must be reached such that a person will be obligated to give zakah, sadaqat al-fitr, etc. Now, there are two standards which are normally followed. There is the silver standard and there's the gold standard. Now, the gold standard today is around $6,567 as of today. And the silver standard is around $650. Sorry, around $550 to $580. Right? Fluctuating every single day between the prices. Now, in some different countries like Pakistan, India, these type of places, they usually go by the silver standard. For example, if you go by PKR in rupees, they usually say that 130,000 rupees would be the threshold such that you would have to give udhiyah if you have more than that amount. Now, a person living in America, $600 is nothing. Right? If he has $600, more than half of that might be used for udhiyah. Right? It's not a practical approach, and it's not a practical approach for any person living in America. Right? So now scholars in the past, although they did stick with the silver standard, scholars in modern times, they began shifting towards the gold standard. So if a person, he has the amount of 6,500 give or take dollars, then he will be liable of giving udhiyah. Now, there are a few differences between this and zakah. Right? Now, if a person has zakah, we know that he will only be liable for those assets which are being used for trade. Right? Any assets which he's planning to keep at home, he's now planning to sell, those will not be counted in that total amount of 6,500. Right? And the second condition is that an entire lunar year must pass over that wealth, and then he will be liable for giving zakah on that money. Now, these are two key differences with udhiyah. That for udhiyah, a person, yes, he will be liable for those things which he was trading with, those things which he was planning to sell, buy, etc. But beyond that, those things which a person has aside from his basic needs, right? Those things which would not be considered his basic needs, those will also be calculated in that total amount towards 6,500. Right? So something like just having surplus of food at home, right? Or having, let's say a person has headphones, a person has an extra phone, a person has these extra things. These will all be calculated. Those are things which a person doesn't need. Those would not be considered basic needs. So the price of those would go into the calculation of that 6,500. So now once a person reaches that 6,500, then he will be liable of slaughtering an animal on the day of Eid. Now the second condition we talked about was the lunar year. That normally a person has to wait for the entire passing of a lunar year for the zakat to become obligated for him, although he can give it before if he wishes to. In the case of udhiyah, when the days of udhiyah start from the 9th, from the 10th until the 12th, then a person, right when the sunrise of the day starts, if he has that 6,500 with him, then he will be liable. Whether 2 days passed, whether 1 month passed, whether a year passed. So those are the two main differences that are found between udhiyah and zakat. And the same applies for sadaqatul fitr. These same two exceptions that we talked about, those same exceptions that apply for sadaqatul fitr. Right? Such that if a person, he has any items beyond his basic needs, those will be calculated when a person gives sadaqatul fitr as well. And there are a few other conditions that I didn't list over here because they're not that common, but we can go over them. For example, when a person is a resident, right? If a person is a resident, meaning he's not a traveler, then that is one of the conditions for a person to have to do udhiyah. Now, why will a person be exempted if he is traveling? We just have to imagine the difficulty a person will go through. For example, he's traveling. Right? Now he has to make arrangements to get an animal. Right? And he has to make arrangements for, he has to make sure it's cut on between those 3 days. He also has to make sure he has a place to store the meat. Right? He has to make sure he has enough money while traveling. Right? There's so many different roadblocks that are there when a person is traveling that it becomes increasingly difficult for a person while he's traveling to do udhiyah. And there's many different examples of, for example, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, Umar radiallahu anh, that while they would be traveling, they would not slaughter any animal. Right? And there's a hadith of Ali radiallahu ta'ala anh where he mentions that for a person who is traveling, then there is no Jum'ah, that is liable on him, and there's no udhiyah. And both share the same reasons. That while a person is traveling, he's on the move constantly. Right? He might not have time to actually attend the Jummah Salah, to sit for the khutbah, to come for the speech, to actually come for the Salah, the huge rush that is there, etc., etc. Right? So these type of rukhas, these type of leniencies are there for a person while he's traveling. And there are a few more shara'it that are there. For example, a person being free, but those don't apply to us today. Now, getting into when a person can actually perform the Qurbani. So the best day to perform the Qurbani, as we mentioned, is that right after a person he performs the Eid Salah, then he can go and he can slaughter the animal. If a person slaughters the animal before the Salah, it will not be valid. Likewise, if he slaughters the animal before sunrise, then it will also not be valid. And the most preferable day to slaughter is the 10th, although it will be valid on the 11th and the 12th of Dhul Hijjah as well. So the best day will be the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, then following 11th, and then finally the 12th. And if a person is slaughtering on the 12th day, then he must slaughter the animal before sunset. And we will later discuss if a person he does not slaughter and the animal was and he was liable for slaughtering, then what are the rulings regarding that? And we just discussed this right now. So this exception over here, Qurbani cannot be performed before their Eid prayer is over. This exception won't apply to many people, but we can just go over it quickly. That if a person is living in a city, for example, right now we're in Lombard. Right? That if a person is living in the city, then these restrictions of slaughtering it after the Eid Salah apply to him. If a person he is living in a rural area, then for him, whether he slaughters before the Salah or after the Salah, it's not even an issue. Because many areas there is no Salah. Right? That in these rural areas there might not even be a masjid. Right? There might not even be a place to pray. Right? So whether he slaughters before or after does not matter. Right? So many people, if they are in a hurry, what they do sometimes is that while they are praying, while the salah is going on over here, what is the reason for a person being liable for slaughter? Right? We went over some conditions, like for example, being sane, being Muslim, right? More importantly, having the nisab. Right? In Arabic, what we call ghina, a person having wealth, being rich, right? Having that 6,500 amount. Right? That when a person has this 6,500 amount, that is the direct cause of udhiyah becoming liable on him. Right? So from a theoretical sense, a person could say that if a person has $6,500 in his pocket year-round, then year-round, the udhiyah is actually liable. Right? That this person, he must do udhiyah year-round. Now, the obvious question is that no, he can only do it when the time of Eid is there. Right? And that is why this waqt, from the 10th of Dhul Hijjah until the 12th, it serves as a barrier. That this aspect of ghina, being rich, having $6,500, is trying to have the effect of making udhiyah liable on this person. But it's being blocked by the aspect of waqt, that a person cannot perform the udhiyah until the proper time has come in. Right? And this just shows how our different masa'il are interconnected. For example, would anyone think that a masala of slaughtering, an issue of slaughtering could be connected to salah in any way? You would think that there's two completely different issues. There are two separate chapters of fiqh. Right? But they are interconnected. Right? That salah has a similar aspect. That if a person is a Muslim, if he is sane, if he is baligh, then salah is liable upon him 24/7. Now, the only reason he's not liable for praying dhuhr at this time is because the deterrent of the time of dhuhr has not occurred. Right? Because the deterrent of the time of dhuhr being there, then the thing which is trying to make it effectively necessary on him cannot be effective. Right? And we see this throughout many different chapters of fiqh where we see everything is interconnected. Now, someone could raise the question that, why look at it in this way? Why look at it in this complicated way, doing mental gymnastics? What's the point of doing all this? Right? This is because that there are certain times where doing these type of mental gymnastics actually matters. Right? Where if someone has a question, if I'm living in America and I don't want to perform the slaughtering over here, I sent my money overseas. I sent my money to India, Pakistan, or some other country. Right? Now, in India, when they're slaughtering the animal, Eid has not occurred in America yet. It's not Eid time here. So now when this person is slaughtering the animal on my behalf, is that slaughtering valid? Now a person will normally think what? No, it's not valid. He's slaughtering the animal for you. Eid has not started for you. It's not valid. Right? But now, look at this theoretical framework that we just discussed. Then we see a different answer. Right? We know through usul al-fiqh that in these type of actions, these type of ibadat which are linked with wealth. For example, this animal is considered wealth that he's slaughtering on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Giving zakah, that's a ibadah that's linked with wealth. That what is considered is the place where that wealth is, not the place of the person who's actually doing the action or on whose behalf the action is done for. Right? So now, what did we just say? That a person, by being rich, quote unquote, having $6,500, that udhiyah is trying to become necessary upon him all year long. There was one deterrent. And what was that one deterrent? It was the time not coming in. Correct? It was a time not coming in. So now, if the thing which is considered is the place where the place of the wealth, and the place of the wealth is in India, and in India it is the time of Eid, has the deterrent not been lifted? The deterrent which was there of the Eid time not entering, if the actual place which is considered is the place of the wealth, where the animal on his behalf is being slaughtered in India, so that the deterrent of the time not being there has now been lifted. So now him being rich can now be effective. And now even though Eid has not come in America, that slaughtering will still be valid on his behalf. Right? So when we think about these different issues, it gives us the appreciation for how deep fiqh can get. Right? And this is just a drop in the ocean. This is just a drop in the ocean where there's even more technical discussions, right? Where usul al-fiqh and how the different chapters of fiqh, for example, how a mas'ala of talaq can be connected with a mas'ala of had, how a mas'ala of doing tahara can be connected with something with hajj, where we see no connection between the two chapters, but the fuqaha, they've woven a system where everything is interconnected, that they're underpinned by the same exact qaida, by the same exact rule. Okay, now getting back on track of which animals can be slaughtered. For a sheep, the sheep must be 1 year old. A goat must be 1 year old as well. For a cow, ox, or buffalo, it must be 2 years old. A camel, 5 years old. Sheep's and goat will suffice for one person's udhiyah. Just if anyone's wondering for questions, we'll leave questions until the end, inshallah. I'll try to give maybe 10-15 minutes towards the end for questions. And this last point over here, cows and camels will suffice for 7 people. Now, there's a bit of a discussion over here that, yes, we know goats, sheep, they'll only suffice for one person. But now what we have over here what's called a badana in Arabic. A badana is an animal which can be divided into 7 shares. Meaning 1 cow or 1 camel will suffice for 7 people, and that will lift the obligation of udhiyah. But what if 2 people want to share between a camel? Is that valid? What about 3 people? And what about the question if, let's say a person went out and he bought the animal on behalf of 4 or 5 people. Now after they have already purchased that animal, someone else came and said, can I join in? You have 2 more shares left, can I join in on the shares? Is that something which is permissible? So let's address each question one by one, inshallah. So the first question is that we know a person can have up to 7 shares for a camel or a cow. Now, can a person have 2 or 3 or less than that? Imam Muhammad in Al-Asl, he makes the argument that if a person, he can restrict himself to having just 1 share out of 7, then to a greater degree, if he wants to do 2, 3, 4, or 5, then that should be fine. So if 2 people, they're sharing between 2 camels, maybe they're doing 3.5, 3.5. Right? If he was allowed to do 1 share, right? Meaning if there were 7 people sharing between a camel and he was allowed to do 1 share, then to a greater degree, if he's doing more, then that's even better. Right? So that shouldn't be a problem. Now, there comes a discussion of can there be half a share? Right? That we just said that there can be 7 shares, but what if someone says, I want to take half a share? Is that something which is permissible? No, it is not. Right? If a person, he comes and says, I want to take half a share, there is no such thing. The bare minimum is that a person must have 1 share. So such that, let's say for example, there is 6 people, or let's say there's 7 people. The first 6 say we will take, the first 5 say we will take 5. The 6th person says I'll take 1.5. I'll take the 6th share and half more. And that final 7th person says I'll take that remaining 1/2. Because of him taking that 1/2, everyone's udhiyah will become invalid. And the reason for that is because although you can distribute the shares between different people, the entirety of the animal must be given as an ibadah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It must be dedicated for ibadah. And since we establish it as a ground ruling that the base is that a person can only have 1 full share, then by him taking that, restricting himself to that half share, he effectively removed that half share from being designated as an ibadah. And by removing that half share as an ibadah, only 6.5 remained as ibadah and not that full 7. And because of that, the whole thing became invalidated. Okay? Now, the final question which we talked about is that if a person, he had bought an animal for, let's say, just for himself, or he had bought the animal with between 3 or 4 people. They purchased it. And now 2 days before, a person did not get a chance to purchase the animal yet. So he approaches the person and he asks that, can I join in? I want to join in for a share as well. You guys have some extra shares. I want to join in for a share. Right? So if a person, he is in a situation where udhiyah was liable upon him, meaning that he had that 6,500, then it is fine. We won't get into the whole rational reasoning behind it because that'll take too long, but it will be fine. Right? But in the case where we know, even if a person is not liable for doing udhiyah, such that he is poor, maybe he only has 5,000, maybe he's a student studying, maybe he only has $4,000, he can still go and he can slaughter. Right? Although it's not obligatory on him, once he buys the animal, then it becomes obligatory on him. It's similar to salah. Right? We know that if a person prays does a person have to pray nafil salah? No, he doesn't. But once he starts that nafil salah, then it becomes binding upon him. Right? Such that, let's say I come over here, I start my nafil salah, and then I pass gas, my wudu breaks. Now making up that 2 rakahs of nafil becomes wajib. Because I started our ibadah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it must be completed. So now this is similarly where a connection is made. That person did not have to slaughter. It was not wajib upon him. But now by buying the animal, he effectively made it necessary upon himself. Okay? So if a person is rich, he has a 6,500, he can add anyone in afterwards, after the purchase. But if a person is poor, this is where the discussion comes in. If a person is poor, he did not have that full 6,500. Then if he had bought the animal specifically for those people, not intending to add anyone else, then he will not be allowed to add that person in. And the reasoning for that is because he had already dedicated that portion for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For example, this person who was considered quote unquote a faqir, according to technical terms, a poor person, he had bought this goat for $400. He himself out of pocket had designated that $400 for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now by letting this person come in, will that person not share in the burden of that price? He will. That person might end up paying a portion of that amount. Right? That now $400 is not a practical amount for a cow. Let's say 1,000. Okay? Let's say he paid 1,000. Now that person had originally paid 1,000 for himself. But now letting that person join in on the share, maybe he'll shoulder 300 of that, 400 of that. Right? So now something which had already designated for ibadah for himself, he's effectively removing that. And that's not allowed. That's haram according to ijma'. So now that person will have to give that amount in sadaqah. Right? He will not be allowed to do that. Now let's go into the type of defects in animals. So the first one we will get into is animal which is blind, one-eyed, or a lame animal. And this is based off in the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, istashrifu al-'ayna wal-udhun. Right? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he commanded the Sahaba anhum that Ibn Malik rahimullah, he explained, there's many different interpretations that can be given, but Ibn Malik rahimullah, he says that choose an animal which has proper eyesight, its eyes are not messed up, and its ears are complete, meaning its ears are not cut. Right? So, based off on the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, if an animal is blind or one-eyed, as in Arabic what we call a'war, then it's not valid for udhiyah. The same thing is for a lame animal. Now there will be some further discussion on lame animal upon what if there's just small cut, what if it's just a small injury, etc. We'll get to that into a second. Now, an animal so emaciated that it cannot walk to its slaughtering place. That this means an animal that is abnormally thin. That this animal is so abnormally thin and it's so weak that it cannot even walk to the place where you will be slaughtering it. In such a case, that animal cannot be slaughtered. Now, we need to keep in mind, we're talking in the context of what? Qurbani, udhiyah. Right? That some of these animals, they would be valid to slaughter. It's just that there's more of a restriction when it comes to udhiyah. Right? And why is that? And we can think back to the story of Habil and Qabil. Right? We saw the sacrifice of Qabil was not accepted. Why? Because he took the most vile crop, the worst of crops, and he presented that to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where in this case, where we're trying to embody the sunnah of Ibrahim alayhi salam, trying to embody the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we should make an effort to give the best of animals. Right? Why we want to give an animal which is blind, one-eyed, lame, so weak that it cannot walk, etc. Okay? Now, an animal with 1/3 part of the ear or the nose or the tail missing. There is a bit of a pushback on this, which we'll get into in a second, that the jurists, they have a difference of opinion. That this discussion is centered around that if majority of the ear or majority of the nose or the tail is cut off, then it will not be valid. Now the whole question is that what is majority? Is majority half? Is majority 2/3? Right? That's the whole discussion. Right? So after a long back and forth, the preferred opinion is that it is 1/3. Right? And when we look at the hadith of Sa'd bin Waqqas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, in the time when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam visited him in Hajjatul Wada', he said to, and he was asking Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I want to give all my money in sadaqah essentially. And he in his mind thought he was close to passing away. He said, can I give all of it? Rasulullah said no. He said, can I give 2/3 of it? Rasulullah said no. Can I give half? Rasulullah said no. He said, can I give 1/3? Rasulullah said, الثلث والثلث كثير أو قال كبير. Right? According to the different riwayat. Right? That, yes, go ahead and give 1/3, and that is a lot. That's a lot. So, through the context of the hadith, we can see that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam considered 1/3 to be a large amount. Right? So, if an animal's ear or nose or tail is cut more, 1/3 or more, then that animal will not be valid for udhiyah. Now, there is a bit of discussion surrounding the tail. There's a istifta, a question that is asked nowadays, that many animals, their tails are actually cut off from the time of birth on purpose. And the reasoning for that is because the tail naturally is very close to the private area, and filth and other things get on it which cause bacteria. Some of the animals die, it causes disease to spread, etc. So many farmers or many people today, they purposely cut off the tail of the animal. So the question comes that all these sheep, all these different animals, we see the tails are cut off, so are they not valid for udhiyah anymore? So this masala was recently revisited by Shaykh al-Hadith in South Africa, Mufti al-Haq Sahab. He addresses it in Fatawa Darul Zakaria, volume 6, I believe page 365, where he talks about this masala, where if it is a common occurrence where the tail is being cut off on purpose, for this reason, because of urf and because of these, right? Its nose or some other tail is missing, right? We'll mention it towards the end of all these different reasons. We'll mention a common factor that's found between all these different reasons, so we can understand it from a rational aspect. An animal born without ears, similarly, because of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is tashrifu al-ayn wal-udhun, right? Udhun meaning the ear. So now getting into, and this last issue over here, an animal whose horns are uprooted totally, creating a defect in the brain. So this is what we call in fiqh a qaid ihtirazi, right? It's a qualifier that is meant to actually restrict that thing, as opposed to what we call a qaid ittifaqi, meaning it's just something which is mentioned. Whether it's there or not, it's inconsequential. So if its horns are uprooted such that it creates a defect in the brain, then this defect is consequential, and the animal will not be valid for udhiyah. Now, just for an example, let's say this is a qaid ittifaqi. I said this is a qaid ihtirazi, but let's say it's a qaid ittifaqi. So this would mean that if its horns are uprooted, whether it damages its brain or not, it still would not be valid. That's what we would call a qaid ittifaqi. Meaning this qualifier he mentioned, it doesn't matter. He just mentioned it just as passing. It doesn't really matter whether he mentioned it or not. Right? So since this is a qaid ihtirazi, it's actually a restrictive qualifier, then we can understand from this what? That an animal whose horns are uprooted, but it does not damage the brain, it does not damage the animal, then it will still be fine for udhiyah. Okay? So all of these different reasons and some more rare ones which I left out can all be summarized into this one Arabic rule. العيب كل صفة تزيل المنفعة على الكمال أو الجمال. So we were talking about many different aibs, or what we would call a defect. Right? So in technical terms, a defect would be that quality which removes a benefit, meaning the benefit of meat, laham, right? In such a manner where it's not in the same perfect manner it was before, or removes the beauty of it, meaning removes the beauty of the animal. If there is such a defect, then that defect will be effective, and the animal will not be valid for udhiyah. And if you look at every single one of these defects, it falls into that definition. Okay? Now let's get into some of the etiquettes of udhiyah, the do's. The animal should be placed on his left side facing the qibla. And we know that this is a general thing, that a person should generally try to face the qibla, whether slaughtering an animal, whether sleeping, when a person is laid down in the grave, that it's just generally better to face the qibla. It is more virtuous to slaughter the animal with one's own hand. Right? This is preferable. This is mentioned in the hadith of Rasulullah that a person should try to slaughter the animal with his own hand. Now, if a person is not able to slaughter the animal with his own hand, then it is still preferable for him to at least stand and watch. Okay? Because of a hadith where Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, obviously she was not slaughtering her own animal. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam told her, قُومِي فَاشْهَدِي. Right? قُومِي فَاشْهَدِي فَإِنَّهُ يُغْفَرُ لَكِ بِأَوَّلِ قَطْرَةٍ مِّن دَمِهَا كُلُّ ذَنْبٍ. That stand and watch, and all of your sins are forgiven for this animal that is slaughtered. Meaning the very first drop of blood, we know that when an animal is slaughtered, before the first drop of blood even reaches the ground, all that person's sins are forgiven. It is necessary to recite Bismillah, Allahu Akbar when slaughtering. So just a quick discussion on this. We know that a person needs to recite Bismillah, Allahu Akbar while he is slaughtering. Now, the question is that, what if he leaves it out? Right? What if a person leaves it out? So, if a person leaves out the tasmiyah, what we would call Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, before slaughtering on purpose, then the slaughtering will not be valid. It will be considered maytah, it will be considered carrion. If he leaves it by accident, right? If he leaves it by accident, then that's fine. Right? Because it could happen, right? The humans are forgetful. Right? There's a certain level of necessity there. So if a person forgetfully slaughters, not realizing that he didn't say the tasmiyah, then it will be fine. Now, there's one more issue that actually I've heard about this case happening, where a person, he purposefully did not say the tasmiyah, he purposely did not say Bismillah Akbar, but he was under assumption that you didn't have to say it. He didn't know you were supposed to say it. In that case, the ruling will be similar to a person who forgot. Right? Because of that misconception, that misunderstanding he had, then he will also not be held liable. Now, to expound briefly on the other point, that it is more virtuous to slaughter the animal with one's own hand. Preferably, if a person cannot do it by himself, then he should try to get a Muslim to do it. Right? If a kitabi is there, if a Christian is there, yes, it will be valid, but it will be makruh. Right? Because at the end of the day, it is an ibadah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And an ibadah in its most complete form should be done by a Muslim and not by a kafir. Okay? Now, we should, obviously this is obvious, use a sharp knife and slaughter the animal quickly so that it does not suffer. And this is just a general rule. It ties back to a general rule that a person, when he is treating the animal, he should treat it in the best manner. There will be a few other points where he should sharpen the knife. He should not sharpen the knife in front of the animal. Right? You should not drag the animal there, etc., etc. Anything which would be considered inappropriate or abusing the animal, that should not be done in any way. Now, this final ruling there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding this, right? That it says it is mustahab. This is why it has been bolded and highlighted, and bolded and underlined. It is mustahab for the one who intends to perform Qurbani to refrain from cutting his hair or clipping nails from the 1st of Dhul Hijjah to the 10th of Dhul Hijjah. And many people treat this as a fard. They treat it as a wajib. Right? That if they see a person cutting his nails, they see a person cutting his hair, then the things which he has to hear from them, it far exceeds something which is mustahab, or as some people say, is sunnah. Right? Yes, undoubtedly it's preferable to do. Right? But if a person does it, it's not the biggest deal in the world. Right? And another issue is that if a person, let's say he forgot, the 1st of Dhul Hijjah is here, and he forgot to cut his nails, but his nails are so long that they're filthy. His hair is so long that it's filthy. Right? Then in that case, he is trying to uphold a mustahab while doing something makruh anyway. Right? Now, we know a person, he must cut his pubic hair before 40 days. After 40 days, he will be sinful. Now, this person, if he's trying to be pious, and he's saying that, no, I will observe this mustahab, and I will not cut any of my hair for the next 10 days. But now he's exceeding that 40-day limit. In upholding a mustahab, he's now committing something which is makruh tahrimi. Right? So a person needs to weigh between what he is doing. Now, just to discuss it, that what vessels must be cut. So there are 4 vessels: the trachea, the esophagus, and the 2 arteries. So the trachea is in front of the esophagus is behind it, and the 2 arteries on the left and right of the esophagus. So there's some difference of opinion between the madhahib and within the Hanafiya themselves over how many need to be cut. And for Hanafiya specifically, not how many need to be cut, but which ones. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he states that 3 must be cut. Whichever 3 there are, that's good enough. Any 3. Right? Without specification. Sahibain, meaning Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah students, Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad, Imam Abu Yusuf, they say that the trachea, the esophagus, and one of the arteries must be cut. And that is good enough. Usually fatwa is given on Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, so whichever one in the 3 you cut, that will be good enough. Now, moving on to the etiquettes of udhiyah in terms of the don'ts. So we already mentioned some of these. Do not sharpen the knife in front of the animal. Do not skin the animal before it becomes completely cold. Do not slaughter one animal in presence of another. So this one sometimes might be unavoidable. Right? So the general rule is that to the best of our ability, we try to relax the animal. Like for example, before you slaughter the animal, try to give it something to drink. Maybe it can eat something, get it to relax. Right? To the best of our ability, we try to observe these things. But if it's in such an area where you cannot avoid it, the animals must be slaughtered from another, then that's fine. Meaning it would be fine either way, but the karaha wouldn't be there. The disliked nature of it would be removed. Do not slaughter with such force that the head is completely severed and the knife reaches the spinal cord. Right? This is because you're doing more than necessary. Right? That more pain should not be given to the animal than possible. Right? That if a person, he needs to cut the 3 vessels to kill the animal, then to cut the 3 vessels to kill the animal. Right? That by cutting more than that, you're just causing the animal more pain while it's still alive. So that's the reason behind that. But although even if a person severs the head completely, it will still be valid. Do not drag the animal to the place of slaughter or mistreat it in any way. That's obvious in itself, that do not cause the animal or mistreat the animal in any way. Now, going over some of the du'as at the time of udhiyah. Everyone should try to memorize these du'as. If you want, you can take a picture of this, right? That maybe if you can't memorize it, at least read it from your phone before doing the udhiyah and after the udhiyah. The first one is, إني وجهت وجهي للذي فطر السماوات والأرض ملة إبراهيم حنيفا وما أنا من المشركين. That indeed I have turned my face to the one who originated the skies and the earth, upon the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, being a devout believer. وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, I am not from the polytheists. Inna salati, indeed my salah, wa nusuki, and my piety, wa mahya wa mati, and my life and death is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Lord of the worlds. La sharika lah, there's no partner to him. Wa bidhalika umirt, and I have been commanded to do that. Wa ana awwalul muslimin, I am the first of the believers. Allahumma minka wa lak, Allah, from you and for you. And so this is a dua that should be recited while slaughtering. Okay? And the next dua is the dua after the udhiyah has been completed, which is Allahumma taqabbalhu minni kama taqabbalta min habibika Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So, oh Allah, accept it from me just as how you accepted it from your beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and wa khalilik, and your close friend Ibrahim alayhi salam, alayhim salatu wassalam. Now going to distribution of the udhiyah meat. So the meat can generally be divided into three parts. The first part should be kept for one's own family. Second one should be distributed amongst the poor. This is something which is neglected sometimes, so we should try our best to try to observe this, that 1/3 of the meat can be given to the needy people, right? And 1/3 should be stored for later, right? It's not necessary that you give that raw meat, right? Which might be obvious enough, but that you can cook the meat and you can give it to the poor, right? And 1/3 can be stored for later. The hide, fur, etc. can be used after slaughtering the animal. If the animal has multiple shares, okay, this is we don't need to go over any of this. Now going to some miscellaneous udhiyah issues. So it says it is permissible to carry out a nafil qurbani after one has done their compulsory qurbani. So this is something which is good. If a person is able to do it, he should do it, definitely. Right? Because this narration we see, Ali radiallahu ta'ala, he slaughtered 2 rams. One he did for himself, and one he would do on behalf of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We also know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he would always slaughter a ram on behalf of us. Right? That Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever he would be doing udhiyah, one animal would be slaughtered on behalf of the ummah. Right? So we can do the same exact thing. Right? Either we can do it for one of our family members, a deceased family member, right? That a grandmother, our mother, someone who has passed away, right? Someone who cannot afford it, we can do on their behalf as well, or we can do on behalf of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So if someone has the means to do it, he should definitely go ahead and do it. This issue over here, giving sadaqah in lieu of the qurbani, so this is a modern issue that came up where some of the manhaj taysiri, right? There's a concept that arose of scholars like Yusuf al-Qaradawi, their camp, where they started something called manhaj taysiri, where they gave a lot of strength and reliance to the maqasid of sharia, right? That the maqasid of sharia, for example, hifthul nafs, hifthul mal, right? The protection of life, protection of wealth, right? The hifthul ird, protection of honor. That these different maqasid, these different intents of sharia that are there, they gave it a very, very high pedestal, higher than it should be, right? And based off on that, they twisted different rulings and they interpreted different verses of the Quran. And the ironic thing about this is that these very same maqasid of sharia, which we mentioned, hifzul nafs, hifzul mal, these were derived from those very same ayat and hadith themselves. So now they use a derivative of those ayat, they use a derivative of those hadith and change the very foundation of those derivatives. And one of the rulings that to change is that a person does not have to give qurbani. If as long as he gives that $400, as long as he gives that $300, that's good enough. But according to nusus, according to text and hadith, this is not valid. Now, finally going to this last issue of the ayah I recited at the beginning, tying the whole discussion back together. That لَن يَنَالَ اللَّهَ لُحُومُهَا وَلَا دِمَاؤُهَا وَلَكِنْ يَنَالُهُ التَّقْوَى مِنْكُمْ. Right? That Allah Ta'ala will not receive meaning this meat that's there, this flesh that's there, this blood that's there, that will never reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, what will reach Him is your taqwa, your piety, your intention, what your reason was behind that. Right? To the point that if a person, let's say, we just discussed that a badana, a cow and a camel can be distributed into 7 shares. If one of those shareholders, or the person who's sharing in that share, if he has the intention just to get the meat, he doesn't have the intention to actually do udhiyah, all 7 shares will become invalid. Right? So Allah Ta'ala is emphasizing this ayah, that it does not matter to me, the meat. That will never reach me. The blood will never reach me. What I'm trying to see is your intention. Why are you slaughtering? What is your reasoning behind it? It goes back to the philosophy of Qurbani, the philosophy of udhiyah. Not just udhiyah and Qurbani, but the philosophy of our deen in general. That our entire deen can be underpinned by submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That every single one of our actions, they will only have true weight if they are done with submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I'm praying salah, just going up and down, just aimless actions. If I'm just fasting, staying hungry. If I'm waking up for tahajjud even, just doing aimless actions. If I'm giving zakah because I feel like it's a burden. Right? If I'm doing these type of things, yes, the obligation might be lifted. Yes, the obligation will be lifted. But the ruh, the spirit of the ibadah, the spirit of the udhiyah, the spirit of the salah, the spirit of the sajda, that will be completely gone. It won't have any effect. It won't have the ruhani effect. Right? If a person wants to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he has to make sure that every action he is doing, he's making sure it has the spirit of the action. Right? That any action this person does, it's truly to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And Mujahid rahimahullah, just as a more of a ilmi point on this ayah, he mentions that the sababun nuzul, the reason of revelation for this ayah, was that the mushrikun in Makkah, what they would do is that they would get the meat that they would slaughter and they would put it around the Kaaba, saying that we're giving this an offering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When they would do that, Allah Ta'ala sent down the verse that I have no need for your meat. I have no need for your blood. Right? What I want to see is that was this action done solely for me? Right? And they did this action for the idols, so Allah Ta'ala had no need for it. Right? So this is once again, as we mentioned, just highlighting the core concept of our deen, that all of our actions should be surrounding and underpinned by the submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not for anything else. Right? And this is something we should slowly try to fix. Right? That yes, now when Eid comes on Monday, we should rectify our intention. That while we're driving to go slaughter the animal, that I'm doing this, oh Allah, for your sake. While you're slaughtering, keep in your mind that, oh Allah, I'm doing this for your sake. However weak my intention may be, I'm trying to make a good intention. So allow me to have a good intention. Right? But now beyond that, do the same for salah. Right? When a person's come to the masjid, the salah is not just restricted to the action itself. Right? When a person, whether he makes wudu at home or at the masjid, while he's making wudu, he should be in the mentality as if I'm already in salah. He should stay quiet. While he's making wudu, he should imagine that his sins are falling off. While he walks to the masjid, he sits down. If there's 2 minutes, he should sit down and think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? If a person just runs in for salah, it's as if the fan that was moving, now that will begin slowing down, and when it actually stops and he can actually concentrate, it's already second and third rak'ah. Right? And when the person is in that salah, right? We know, for example, the shaitan which distracts people in salah, his name is khinzab. Khinzab means a rotten piece of flesh, his name is khinzab. Right? Now when the shaitan comes and distracts him in salah, his nafs is distracting him in salah, a person should actively try to revert back his attention back towards salah. Right? That if he gets distracted, then he filters out those thoughts, he continues focusing on his salah. Right? The reason why I'm putting so much emphasis on salah is because of the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the very, very famous hadith where a person came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said that, what do you say about a person who he prays Fajr, but then he goes and steals? Right? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said what? Satanhahu salatuhu. That his salah will stop him eventually. But this is provided what? Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran that Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. Indeed, salah prevents you, stops you from lewd things, right? It stops you from those things which are wrong. But then when any of us look in our lives, we see that it's not stopping me from wrong things. It's because the salah does not have the ruh, it does not have the spirit that's needed. right? We're simply lifting an obligation off our shoulders. When we actually start doing everything for Allah Ta'ala, yes, it will be hard in the beginning. Yes, your attention will get averted in salah. But when you make an active effort for it, day by day you improve. And no one said it was going to be easy. Thabit al-Bunani rahimahullah, he said that I perfected my salah for 20 years. I perfected my salah for 20 years, and the next 20 years I enjoyed the salah. Such that when I would pray, it was as if I was throwing the dunya behind my back. It was as if I was standing upon my qabr, on the bridge of Sirat. Jahannam was on my left, Jannah was on my right. That's how his salah became, but that took 20 years. So whatever action may be, whether it's a salah or anything else, when we do it for the submission for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that true flavor that will come into our ibadah, and then that true ruh of Islam will be there. So before we end off, we can take some questions inshallah if there are any questions. Anyone have any questions they want to ask? Any clarification on any of the points that were discussed? Yeah. Yeah. So you said, was there any mention of it? You were asking if there's any mention of that, or?
Yeah, and also my understanding, right or wrong, was that 1/3 could be given and distributed among friends and family.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct, right?
Must go to the poor, and 1/3 you can use for yourself, not necessarily only has to.
Yeah. So now, yeah, you want to finish? Yeah, so if you look at the different fiqh books, they mention that, and you are correct in your point where it should be distributed to families, friends and family as well. I just mentioned the poor as one of the options. And the second point being that, assumption, I thought a person has to keep the 1/3. No, a person does not have to keep the 1/3, because that meat which he is getting from the animal, that's solely his right. That's his ownership. He owns that meat. A person can do anything with whatever he owns, correct? Right? If I own this water bottle, do I have to drink this water? No, I don't. Right? This water is owned by me. I can do whatever I want. I can gift it to someone. I can give it to someone else. Yes, it is. You are correct that it is preferable for a person to eat from the meat of udhiyah because it's blessed meat. This meat was slaughtered for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So a person should partake in that meat. But is it necessary that a person has to eat that meat? No. It's just preferable. Does that answer the question? Sorry, what was that?
It is a new aspect for me.
Yeah.
And there was mention of cutting the 4 of the 3 main and those things. Why not to cut all 4?
Yeah, so we were addressing the bare minimum. That a person for the slaughter to be valid must cut 3 of 4, but yeah, he should try to cut all 4. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
If you're doing a cow and it's 5 people or 7 people?
Up to 7 people, yeah.
So what if one of them, their money is haram? Then is the whole thing invalid?
Yeah, so if a person has, so you're saying, for example, can you give me an example of how he earned that money? Yeah. So when a person he has a haram money, right? He has a haram business, right? So this goes into a discussion of shubha, right? Shubha is basically a doubt that's there, right? So now, when a person he is buying an animal, right? Now there's a shubha because he used haram wealth that the animal will not be valid. Okay? Now, there's shubha sometimes is considered, but shubha to shubha is almost never considered. What do I mean by shubha to shubha? Right? That it's a doubt upon a doubt. Okay? So now, when a person he is buying that share for the animal, right? And he is trying to do it on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those other shareholders that are with him, the other six shareholders, now will that haram wealth now come and affect them? Right? So that's a doubt upon a doubt now. Right? right? Because there was already doubt if that haram wealth would affect the udhiyah or not, correct? Right? Now it's a doubt upon a doubt, and a doubt upon a doubt is never considered. That's the first point. The second point is that the udhiyah itself will be valid, right? Because the reasoning for the udhiyah not being valid is because of an external factor, right? Because look, he bought the animal, he slaughtered it properly, he had his share, right? He fulfilled all the conditions. The reasoning for hurma is because of an external factor, because of something else, right? So the external factor will mean that person will be sinful for using that money like that, but it won't affect the validity. It won't affect the validity of the slaughtering itself. Those are two separable factors, or two separable things. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Also, what if the payment, like, what if you're paying someone else to slaughter and you don't pay them the total after
Yeah. So as long so now this would just be what we call thaman mu'ajjal, deferred payment, right? So as long as they discussed it beforehand, right? Meaning that he saw the animal, right? The payment was decided beforehand. They weighed it, all the different kinds of stuff, and then they were both happy with the payment. Then that'll be fine. Okay.
So if we know that one of the participants in a cow or camel, his income is really from invalid means, so maybe the other partners can avoid him to be their partner. Maybe they can refuse him or have some other person their partner.
Yeah. So ideally, you don't want to do it with someone like that. But in the case where someone did, it would be valid. Okay. Any other questions? Alright. Okay, so enough over here then, inshallah. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the ability to act upon whatever has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.